Audubon at Arcadia. She has been with Mass Audubon for over 30 years. She's been an environmental educator for over 40 years, so she has quite a bit of experience. She graduated with a degree in environmental studies from Antioch, New England. So she has a graduate degree from there. And her favorite birds are crows, ravens, winter wrens, and of course, the American woodcock. Here's Patty.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Okay, and thank you everybody for coming. So I know Janice started to ask the question, but if you can just put in the chat if you've seen a woodcock yet this year, that'd be great. Anybody seen one yet?
I can.
Yeah, we've some people have put woodcocks in Williamstown this week.
Great. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, they are definitely back. Okay. And as Janice said, just feel free to put anything in the chat if you have any questions. So here we go. So the American woodcock is in the sandpiper family. So it is a member of what we think of as the shorebird family, but it's moved inland. So related to the yellowlegs, the snipes, all those other members of that family. The woodcock also is a bird, perhaps the bird that has more nicknames than any other. So the common name is the American woodcock. It's also called the owl snipe, the night partridge, March plover, malaria bird. As you can guess by these names, its habitat is in wet areas. Bogsucker, mudsucker, Labrador twister, and many people's favorite, the timberdoodle. So looking at the range map of the American woodcock, you can see that it's certainly throughout the Northeast, throughout the East as well into the central part of the US. That peach color is the breeding grounds, which we're completely in, as well as going all the way up to Canada. And then if you look at that purple color, the permanent residence, you can see that it doesn't actually migrate all that far from us. So you can have wintering birds as far south, as far north, I should say, as the Rhode Island coast, even into southern Connecticut over there. And I wouldn't doubt if there were some birds that might even overwinter on the Cape in some years. And certainly with climate change, that range will probably move closer to us. So we might be seeing them throughout the year. And I don't know, I should have asked Janice, but whether woodcocks or my guess is that occasionally we may even see them on the Christmas bird count. So again, they don't go all that far, and they're definitely here in our area during the nesting season or during the breeding season. So the description of the woodcock, some people think of them as a kind of comical looking bird. They're a little bit stocky. They have very short legs, long bill. They're about 10 to 12 inches in length, and their bill is about 3 inches. The females are a little bit larger than the males. Pretty much, I would say they're not sexually dimorphic, meaning that the males and the females look the same. However, the females are just a little bit larger, and the females also have a little bit longer beak. Very, very camouflaged or cryptic, so they blend right into the forest floor. And think of, look at that, the color of that bird. Think of maybe a bunch of oak leaves that haven't decomposed, and they would blend right in there. They're about 6 to 8 ounces. So most of our birds are hollow bones and feathers, so they're pretty light. So can you see the woodcock in this picture over here? think we can probably all say that it's in the center, but here's another one. And actually, why don't you just put in the chat where you think the woodcock is in this picture? And then Monique, if you can let me know, please.
Oh, God. Nasty. Oh,
Or feel free to just call it out. Has anybody seen it?
oh, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, some people have said center, some people said upper right, a little left of the center.
Yes, so it is, let me see if I can grab this laser pointer. So it is right over here. So pretty camouflaged. I was fortunate enough a few years ago, somebody had called, I work at Arcadia, as Jim mentioned, and somebody called to say that there was a very strange bird in a community garden. And I went over, they described it, it sounded just like a woodcock. I went over there and they were pointing it out, and I had no idea where. I was looking exactly where they were looking. They had it in the spotting scope, and I still couldn't see it until it moved. So an adaptation, camouflage, and they are pros at that. This is the tail of the woodcock, which you usually don't see, but they use it for communication. So putting that white up, it's not all that different than a white-tailed deer or a cottontail rabbit, where you can see the white on their tail. And it's thought to reflect more light than most other birds. So mostly used for communication with other birds. The head of the woodcock is about the size of a golf ball. The eyes are placed very high on the head, allowing them to see 360 degrees. Most of the time, when they're feeding, their head is right on the ground, their bill going into the ground. So it's really important that their eyes are located as high as they are in their head. Their eyes are jam-packed, filled with rod cells. So we have in the retina of our eyes, we have rod cells and cone cells. So the cones allow us to see color. The rod cells allow us to see black and white and images, and they're very, very light sensitive. In fact, the rod cells are thought to be 500 to 1,000 times more light sensitive than the cone cells. So very, very important for them to be able to see and capture any light. The brain is in the ventral, or kind of upside down position. When they evolved, because the eyes moved so high in the head, the eyes moved high and in the back, the bill lengthened, the nostrils approached the base of the bill, and there was no place for the brain except to be upside down. So they're a bird with an upside down brain, but nevertheless, it works just fine. Their bill is about 3 inches long. And as I was saying, the females is a tiny bit bigger. And their bill is specialized for probing for earthworms, as well as other invertebrates. The top of the bill is hinged, and we'll get into that in just a second. So this picture is showing the skull. And again, you can see how high the eyes are on the top of the head, and you can see how large those eye sockets are. You can see the long bill, and at the bottom one, you can see how it's hinged. And this is actually a little better example of how it's hinged. So the bill, when it goes in the ground, it's hinged, it can open up and it can bend. It has all sorts of sensory receptors on it. So it basically is probing. It can open it, bend it in the ground in order to get its invertebrates. And again, mostly earthworms. So here we have the diet is predominantly earthworms, as well as other invertebrates. So beetle larvae, moth, spiders, ants, really anything that it can get its bill on. They eat more than their own weight each day. They will also tap the ground with their bill, and they're basically simulating rain. So on a night like tonight, when it's raining pretty hard, some of the earthworms will come out so that they won't drown in the ground. And the woodcock has mastered being able to tap the ground, simulate that rain, as if to say, it's raining, come on out, and I'm going to get you. Also, they can be very comical. Sometimes when they're walking, they're bobbing, and it's thought that that bobbing is also simulating rain so that the earthworms will come out. And in the picture on the right, you can see those little holes in the ground. So these were where a woodcock was probing, so to be getting some of those invertebrates. It's something that you can certainly see with woodcocks. You might see something like this. It could also be a lot of other birds, robins, and other birds feeding as well. So the habitat of the woodcock, depending on what it's doing in its life cycle, there's 4 main habitat requirements. So the first one is a clearing for its flight display. So a big field would be perfect for that. The second is early successional forests, and that would be for nesting. And early successional is young forest, so not very old, small shrubs, weedy areas. Orchards are great places for that, forest openings as well. Then moist soil thickets for feeding. And speckled alder is a great indicator species. I'll show you a picture of the catkins or the seeds of the speckled alder in just a minute. But white birch and aspen, those are all really good indicators of good feeding woodcock habitat, so good indicator species. And then large fields. So we don't, as you saw in the range map, we don't yet have woodcocks wintering here, but in places where they do winter, and sometimes in the summer, some of them will get together in fairly large roosts, fairly large meaning double digits, certainly not huge roosts. And I like this slide over here, but this shows those habitats that we were just talking about, and they do overlap. So again, looking at the abandoned farmland, such as blueberry fields, forest openings, also or just fields of usually 10 acres is ideal, 10 acres or larger, and that would be for the singing grounds. A lot of these do overlap, so you can see the nesting habitat would be right in that early growth, those alder, aspen forests, as well as the younger forests, 10 to 30 years old. Mature forests, you're not going to find many woodcocks. It's not very conducive for their lifestyle. So early successional and fields. Again, they'll be displaying in the fields. They'll be nesting and feeding in the woods adjacent to the fields. So all of that is really important for woodcocks. These are slides at Arcadia in East Hampton. So these are the meadows. Also, some of you may know this as the West Meadows, and these are great. This is a great habitat for woodcocks. Some of you may be familiar with that bottom right picture. That's a place also where the eagle nests off to the left in the kind of the wooded area over there. It's right by the river. And those fields with those young forests that we're seeing is perfect woodcock habitat. I should just add that we used to do a lot of programs here, and it's wonderful. There's a lot of woodcocks, but I stopped doing them there just because there was too much competition with people on off-road vehicles. So and there was vandalism out there. So it's a great place for woodcocks, but if you do go, just be careful. I mentioned speckled alder. So on the left, these are the catkins after flowering of the female. the female catkins. And this is what you see on a lot of the speckled alder. It's a little shrub, and these you can see throughout the winter. So if you see this, this would be great indication, great indication that this is good woodcock habitat. On the right, there's the little ones on the top. Those are the female catkins before they flowered, and the long ones are the male catkins, the catkins being the seed-producing part of the plant. So the woodcock, looking at its life cycle, it is a very early breeder. It's one of our earliest birds to breed in Massachusetts. They usually come to Massachusetts in late February to early March or so. And this year, I think Jim and I saw our first one about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. It was really, really early. That's why I question also whether I think some of them may stay around, but it certainly hasn't been proven. The males will defend their territory, usually from March to May. And if anybody's up in the hill towns or the folks from the in the Pittsfield area from the Forbush Bird Club, you're going to probably see them well into June as well. They're polygamous, so the male will have many mates. And as I mentioned before, ideally, they need 10 acres or more for their display field. I have seen them in less, but the ideal situation for them would be at least 10 acres. And the male is doing the display, the courtship, and defending the territory pretty much at dawn and dusk. So the nest is usually within just about 300 feet at the most from the display area. So again, that's why it's really important. You have your open field, and then you have your young forest, your early successional forest, very close by. Excuse me. The nest is a shallow depression on the ground, so it is a ground nester. They usually lay 3 to 4 eggs, and the incubation period is 20 to 22 days. So the eggs usually are April 11th through May 6th. They've been pretty early this year, the birds and calling. So this year, it could be a pretty early year for the egg dates as well. If the nest fails, then they will re-nest or relay eggs. Just like its relative, the killdeer, may pretend to have a broken wing to try to distract predators from the nest. And here's a female on the nest with a few eggs. So the nestlings all leave the nest together a few hours after hatching. They're a precocial bird, meaning they have feathers and they can be pretty active very soon after hatching. They stay with their mother for about 4 to 5 weeks. They're sexually mature at a year, and the average lifespan of a woodcock is about 8 years. So the courtship display of the American woodcock is an amazing thing to see. What I call one of the rituals of spring. It's not spring until you hear a woodcock calling or watch it display. So this is, I think it's just an amazing natural history phenomena. It's been going on for years and years and years, and something not to be missed. So it happens in the spring when other natural history phenomena are happening as well. When sugar maple trees begin to grow those buckets, or basically we put the buckets on to collect the sap. When the red maple is one of the first trees to flower, and we're seeing the buds are swelling, and pretty soon we will see the flowers. Over in the vernal pools, on the left, we have the wood frog, which is one of the first amphibians to move. And the spotted salamander. And these tonight, I predict that tonight is going to be the night when the spotted salamanders are going to be moving to the vernal pools. If you come to Arcadia in the next week or so, the next few days, my prediction is that the wood frogs will be in the vernal pools. Down below, we have a tiny, delicate but beautiful flower of the hazelnut. So all of these things are happening at this time when the woodcock does its display. So the display, there's 4 parts to the display. So the first thing is that it's on the ground and it's strutting around with a puffed out chest, and it's doing something. It's kind of its call is what's basically peent, peent, and I have a recording of it that I'll play in just a minute. So it's peent. So again, it's at dusk. This is a little after sunset. And if you've seen the woodcock, or if you start seeing it this year, you'll soon be able to know exactly when it's woodcock time. So it's twilight, a little bit after sunset. And you'll begin to hear this peent, peent. If folks are familiar with the nighthawk, it sounds very much like a nighthawk as well. So it can continue that peent. It basically does the peent, and then maybe 5 seconds, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the individual, depending on the weather conditions, would give another one. And it could be maybe 15 peents. Maybe as it gets later, it's less duration, and maybe it's only 5 peents. Then it takes off and it goes up into the sky and it spirals to 200 to 300 feet. And it's making a twitter sound. And the twitter sound is not made by the syrinx. The syrinx is the vocal cord of birds. It's made by the wind going through 3 outer wing feathers. Scientists discovered this by removing one of those outer wing feathers, and it didn't make a sound. So that's how they discovered that. So it goes up 200 to 300 feet, going around in a spiral and making that sound coming again from the wings. Then you know it's at the top, and it begins to come down when you start hearing chirping sounds. So instead of those, excuse me, instead of those sounds coming from the feather, it's more of a chirping sound, and it's coming down. It's zigzagging down. And then when it gets to 50 feet before the ground, it becomes silent, and then it goes straight down, and it lands usually pretty close to where it started from, unless there's a disturbance. Here's the wing, and you can see in the upper right, those 3 feathers, and those are the ones that I was saying that the wind goes through there, and that's what makes the sound. And the female and the immature, thank you, the female and the immature, I just got a delivery of some water. The female and the immature, those feathers are different, so they're tighter, so that they don't need to make that sound. The female, in the meantime, was sitting on the ground, watching and looking for a good suitor. So here we have, so I'm going to go through a series of the woodcocks starting on the ground and then going up and doing the spiral and then coming down in the zigzag. Most of these drawings were done by my friend Nan Childs, who lives in Florence. So some of you may know Nan. So the first thing, so here is, well, actually I'm going to do this one. So I'm just going to play this for
is to probe in moist ground for earthworms at night. In the spring, male woodcocks fly to open meadows at dusk.
There's the peep.
What comes next is an extraordinary performance. The strutting male suddenly takes flight. Silhouetted against the fading sunset, the male woodcock makes a continuous high-pitched twittering sound with his wings. He circles above his territory, rising higher and higher in a spiraling ascent toward the heavens. Finally, at the apex of his flight, he suddenly drops from the sky and falls earthward with an unpredictable zigzag motion, making chirp-like whistles as he descends. Having landed on the ground, the woodcock paints several times and then takes flight again, repeating his remarkable display.
You can hear the mewing now, so that just changed. So now it's coming down.
Is to probe.
Okay, so here it goes, spiraling. Then coming down, that's the mewing. And then 50 feet before he hits the ground, comes straight down, and then again starts doing the peating and doing the display all over again. So that's what it's all about. I do have a little video over here. And I'm going to show you one more video. So it's very dark when they're doing the display, or pretty, like, not that much light, I should say. So this is probably more realistic of what you would be seeing. So spiraling up. Now you just heard that change in the sound, so now it's coming down. And there he is. Now you could have just heard the kind of the changing of the sound, so the mewing, so it should be coming down now. There he goes, zigzagging. And then he's starting all over again. So let me just move this thing over here that's in my way. So again, the habitat, so to look for alder, birch, trees. The conditions, it should be a mild evening. Usually, I mean, I've heard them in the low 40s and above. In the wind is definitely detrimental to their flight display. So light wind or no wind is certainly better. They're not going to fly if it's a strong wind. And again, usually mid-March to June. This year started in February. So the first peep is usually heard 21 minutes after sunset on a clear night. So a little bit earlier on an overcast night. And then this goes on for about maybe 40 minutes or so. This also happens in the morning, so a little bit before sunrise. And again, once you've watched this a few times, you'll be able to really measure the intensity of the light and know when it's woodcock time. So when you go out, they're pretty tolerant of people, so you can get pretty close. One of the things is when they go up into the air, if you're with a small group, you can actually run and get a little bit closer and then kind of scrunch down a little bit so that you're not bothering them, but you're able to get closer. But if they move too much, then you know you're disturbing them. So certainly not a good thing. But again, they're fairly tolerant. You can get pretty close in many situations. Take a flashlight, and I would recommend putting red cellophane on, or I guess I'm showing my age. You can have flashlights that have the red light on them, and a lot of birds that do not see color are not going to be affected by that red light. So it's really more for their protection. Be aware, ticks are out. Ticks, unfortunately, are out these days almost year round, and you're going to be in fields, so definitely dress for tick protection. So looking at the conservation status of the woodcock in Massachusetts, and the Northeast, the population is locally pretty stable. However, there had been a multi-year decline in the woodcock population. So this was due to many factors. In the 1960s and 70s, or 50s, 60s, I should say, and into the early 70s, a lot were persistent pesticides, so DDT, heptachlor, chloridane. They were used for spruce budworms as well as other insects, and they persisted for a long time in the environment. It had an effect on it thinned out the eggshells of birds such as woodcocks as well as eagles and falcons. Thankfully, we're not producing those pesticides anymore. But there's certainly other pesticides we need to be concerned with. Hunting can be a stress factor. So there are people who hunt woodcock. It's a pretty small bird. I'm not sure what they're eating, but it is hunted. Predators, and we talk about human stresses, and cats are a big predator, so outdoor cats. So please keep your cats indoors. Climate change is certainly having an effect on woodcocks and development. There's research going on to try to mitigate some of these stress factors, and including studies on migration. So the more we learn about the migration routes, their stopovers, everything about migration, the more we know how to protect their habitat. And habitat management is going on in many places. This is the Breeding Bird Atlas. So Mass Audubon conducted this. This was the first Breeding Bird Atlas, which took place in the late 1970s. So there were a lot of volunteers. Maybe some of you out there had an area where you were looking to document breeding birds. So you can see that confirmed with that darkish green, and throughout the state there were confirmed woodcocks breeding, so that was great, as well as that light green, lots of probable and possible breeding woodcocks. This is Breeding Bird Atlas 2. So this took place 2007 to 2011. So you can see that, again, the woodcock population seems to be fairly stable now and doing pretty good. However, there's a few changes. And this map shows the change of those two bird atlases. And the white triangle, so that's the increase. So that's great. There's a lot of increases. Looking at, especially in the more developed areas in Eastern Mass, there's a lot of decreased areas in woodcock habitat. So certainly something to be concerned with and to be looking at how can we change that in the future. And a lot of that we're concerned with is habitat loss. So I talked earlier about early succession of forests, and that's something that we don't have an awful lot of in Massachusetts. However, there's a lot of organizations that are working to try to bring back early succession of forests. So it's great habitat not only for woodcocks, but for many other species of birds. These two little maps on the right are showing the woodcock range, so the eastern part of the US as well as the southeastern part of the US. And you can see that a lot of the singing ground was lost due to the habitat loss. So these are, again, are things that conservation organizations as well as individual people or landowners can be working on to try to recreate some of that early succession of forest. Climate change with the woodcock. Mass Audubon did some studies, what's a report called State of the Birds, which came out in 2017, looking at several species. I think it was 170 species of birds, and predicting using many factors, habitat, temperature, food availability, all sorts of things to predict what climate change, the effect of climate change on each species. And you can see, so this one is current. So this is high woodcock habitat for much of the state. So that's good. However, if you look at 2000, I think 50 years later, I'm not able to see, I think this is like in about 50 years or something. Oh, here, you can see that Western Massachusetts, we still have pretty good woodcock habitat, but if we continue with the trend we're going on with climate change, the eastern part of the state will lose a lot of the woodcock habitat. And I should say that those factors that they looked at would not be good for the woodcock, and again, with climate change. So what can be done? So again, looking at research of their migration routes, not only where they're migrating, but when they're migrating, their stopover time, so where they stop over, how long they stop over, what they're eating, etc., and creating woodcock habitat. So this is, I talked to you a little, mentioned a little bit about just migration. So where do they start? Where do they stop? How long? And their survival. So this is an organization that's been working on that. One of the things that researchers will do is put on little GPS devices. They're tiny, but they really provide a lot of great information on the migration routes of the woodcock. I mean, it's amazing what science can tell us now about these birds with little devices such as this. These, each of these little green spots is 1 month during the migration of an individual woodcock. And this one is 8 days, and this was on a golf course. So golf courses are big fields, so not to be overlooked as places where you can find woodcocks. Moose Horn National Wildlife Refuge is in northern Maine, and this is in, I believe, Lubec, and they are dedicated. There's two parts of it. This is the northern part, and they are one of their biggest missions is in creating woodcock habitat and doing research on woodcocks. There's a place called the Great Swamp and Patuxent in Rhode Island, also doing research on woodcocks and trying to create woodcock habitat. Locally here in Massachusetts, this is Broadmeadow Brook in Worcester, a Mass Audubon site, and they have been actively getting volunteers to be cutting down certain trees and creating that early successional forest. So they have lots and lots of volunteers. At Arcadia, we've also been doing management to try to create early successional forests. We haven't been doing it specifically for the woodcock, but maybe something that we will do in the future. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop talking and see if there's any questions.
We
Oops.
do have one question earlier from Jim,
Sure.
and the question is, in regards to the 10 acres, is that 10 acres per male?
10 acres per male per display area. Yes, so that's for the display area. Although that is, again, that's ideal. If we go out to some of these spots listening for woodcocks, there's definitely more males, I would say, than 10 acres. So ideal, but I think they can also tolerate less. Any other questions?
One question is, where do you go to find them?
Good question. So really any place where you have a field, and again, looking at that 10 acres or more would be a good starting point. So let's see, places, I'm trying to think where people are coming from. There's a place.
Patty,
Yes.
this is Janice. Do you want to mention the walk Saturday?
Sure. So Saturday.
Here's a place.
Yeah, yes. Saturday, we are doing a walk with the Hampshire Bird Club at Park Hill Orchard in East Hampton. So you can, Janice, what time is it? 5:30, I want to say?
5:45 to 7.
5:45. Okay, so you can come to Park Hill Orchard in East Hampton. I mentioned orchards, so that would be an ideal place. The Atkins Farm in Belchertown has some orchards. Those are great places. If you went to Fort River in Hadley, some of those fields over there, walking the road, would be wonderful places. Arcadia Wildlife Sanctuary, as I mentioned. For the folks in Pittsfield, I'm not that familiar with the area, but I'm sure, I think Mass Audubon in the Berkshires, I can't remember the name of not Pleasant Valley. There's another one that's more fields. Help me out, Berkshire folks.
Gale Ave Swamp is one place.
New
Okay.
Meadows.
Oh, Canoe Meadows,
Canoe
thank
Meadows.
you. Yeah, Canoe Meadows, I couldn't think of it. Moran Wildlife Management Area in Windsor, kind of halfway between us and the Berkshires. Really, at this time of year, almost any field. I know, like when I drive down Route 9, like in Williamsburg, there's all those fields, and just like opening your window and listening, those are really great places, to be seeing and hearing woodcocks. And I should say too that the best thing to do is to be listening. So you're not going to see the birds right away. It's really an audio experience. You know, you're very lucky if you are able to see them. And, you know, like in many situations, you will be able to, but it's also something to really be tuned into to listening for.
Another question, do we see much migration into New Hampshire?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. So they're nesting. There's all sorts of displays in New Hampshire as well. Is that what the question was? Meaning?
Yes, into
Okay.
New Hampshire, yeah.
Mhm.
Another question is, I don't usually see woodcocks flying, let alone flying really high in the air like the males do during their display. Do they typically fly when not on display?
They certainly do fly, and in fact, but I would say that they wouldn't fly super, you know, they wouldn't get to 200 to 300 feet. And there's also, when you see them, when you're looking at the display, sometimes one will move from one location to another, and sometimes you're seeing some territorial disputes where one male will be pushing another out, and you'll hear this other, it's almost like a "rah, rah, 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 rah" type sound. It's kind of interesting. So yes, they definitely do fly.
I think we answered the question on reliable places to see them in Berkshire. How many eggs do they lay typically?
I think it's 3 to 5. I know I had it on there, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 to 5.
Another question coming in, do the females wander between male territory, or does the male move from different females?
The female will usually stay in one area, and that's actually a good question that I would need to look up, but I believe that the female goes to the male, but I'm not 100% sure. Somebody else might know the answer to that. Janice or Jim or anybody else?
Not I.
Okay. Something to look up.
More questions are coming in. Is there adequate earthworm populations to sustain them, or is that a concern?
There are, in fact, probably too many in terms of, so most of our earthworms are not native, and we now have the jumping worms, which are pretty prolific. So I guess if anything, it's feeding woodcocks and other insect eating or invertebrate, I should say, eating birds. So right now, it's certainly not a problem.
Right. And that, I think you answered the question, do they eat the invasive jumping earthworms?
As far as I know, yes. I don't think they're fussy.
They're
That's
not
all.
eating enough.
Right, exactly.
Do they rotate as they paint?
Do they rotate, did you say?
Yes, rotate as they paint. If I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're watching them, they'll paint and then they'll move, you know, a little bit. They'll turn a little bit, they'll paint again, they'll turn a little bit, they'll paint again.
Okay, I couldn't understand the question by rotating. Yes, and it's actually if you get a flashlight and you're able to look, they'll be as Jim said, they'll be completely turning, and sometimes it can make it difficult to try to figure out where they're coming from because of that. But yes, they absolutely do. Thank you, Jim.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Any more questions? On the 2050 map, the decline in the east is because of habitat loss and development. Is that the reason?
That's part of it. As I mentioned with that, the state of the birds, they took into consideration many different factors. So it was whether it would be like the temperature getting warmer, more precipitation, food source that would or wouldn't be available, changes in food source. So if you get on to Mass Audubon's website, the state of the birds, you can see each of those categories that they looked into. So certainly habitat loss is one thing, but there's other factors as well.
Next question, what do they have to do to impress a female, or is there only one male when he's it?
No, that the male will actually mate with several females. And what you need to do is to say, I've got the best territory out here and I can do the best display. So that's why, like you can see me flying up and doing the best dance, and my territory is the best.
All right, any other questions? Comment, this is been one of the most practically useful, interesting presentations yet.
Thank you.
And thank you, Patty, nice talk.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope to see some of you on Saturday. And if anybody wants to get out tonight, I know I'm going to be going out in a few minutes to look for amphibians. So tonight might be the night. Good night,
So-
everybody.
This is Janice. I just want to do one more plug for a woodcock walk with Patty in East Hampton, 5:45 Saturday night. And Park Hill, help me, East Hampton Community Gardens. On what street, Patty or Jim?
Park.
East Hampton Community Garden on Park Hill in East Hampton. Park
On
Hill
Park
Road.
Hill.
Park Hill Road.
Okay. It says some places that it's a new member walk, but it is open to everyone, and we hope to see some of you there on Saturday. And we'll be sending out an email reminder to everybody about the gathering, the woodcock gathering. How many do you think will show up, Patty?
Woodcocks or people?
Well, both. Let's try both.
The woodcocks, there's been a lot. And one thing I should say early on is that there's a lot of woodcocks migrating through. So it's not just the residents that are calling, but there's others that might be on their grounds as well. So if the weather is good, then I'm hoping in that area we should be able to see maybe, or hear maybe 6 different individuals. Jim, you've been there. What do you think?
Yeah, 5 to 6 is what we hear most nights up there.
I would encourage you get there early, Park, so that we can be on our best. And remember, that is the night we're going to lose an hour.
Right. And remember also dress for ticks. So I usually dress like it's pouring rain out, wearing like rain pants or tick gaiters, boots. Just be prepared, that there could be ticks out there.
Okay. So thank you very much. I see there's no more questions. Thank you, wonderful Patty. We love having you, and we will see you on Saturday.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Good night.
Patty.
You're welcome. Good night.